Okay, so information processing is one of the theories about cognitive development, and information processing really borrows some of the language and ideas that we've gained through computer science. And it doesn't mean that information processing theorists think that the human mind actually works in the same way as a computer, but the language of computer science and the way that we describe computers provides a helpful sort of language to use and to break down how humans may process information from the environment around them, how they tend to take in that information and act upon it, and also the kinds of strategies that we use. So, some of you are probably sitting in front of a computer or a phone or something right now, and all of those devices have some things in common. They have some kind of storage device, some kind of a hard drive or storage card where you can write information on and save it basically is for a long term. Um, it also has some kind of active processing memory or RAM that's only uh, good for while the power is on. So if you cut the power, the information that's in the RAM that hasn't been saved to the hard drive would would be lost. It has some kind of central processor unit, some kind of controller that dictates how information is moved through this computer. It has some kind of input device, whether it's a touch screen or a keyboard or a microphone. It has some kind of output device, whether it's a screen you look at or a printer, some way that gets information out of it. And using that kind of a metaphor, information processing theorists describe children's thinking as uh, a system, a series of steps in how we take in and process information. And I can show you in a couple of different diagrams here. In this one, and I'm losing my pointer. Information reaches our sensory registers, such as our eyes or our touch or our ears. And if we attend to that information that reaches our senses, we may then process it. It can enter our short term or working memory. And from there, it may enter our long term memory. And all those different functions are directed by what's called executive functioning, which directs what we attend to and what we process in memory. This kind of model is another model that's typical of information processing theories. And I should say that there's not just one single information processing theory. This is a variety, a collection sort of mini theories that share that idea of using the computer science metaphor in common. So in this model, information from the environment, that stimuli reaches our sensory memory. Uh, that means we notice it, and it's just going to be very momentary. And if we attend to it, it may enter our short-term or working memory. If we don't, it's gone. We'll never remember that it was there. If it enters our working memory as adults, we have 7 to 9 sort of slots in our working memory where we can keep information alive for just a few seconds. But if we rehearse it, we can keep it alive much longer. And we may encode that information into our long term memory, which is thought of as being permanent. And then we can retrieve it out. Now, even though that information is there permanently, we may not always be able to access it. And so, developmentally, when we talk about information processing and what changes as children grow older, children are thought to be more planful, more intentional in how they focus their attention. So, they use more strategies. In general, as children grow older, attention gets better. Uh, they get faster at processing the information. They start to use strategies that also increases their information processing. So to use that computer science metaphor, you might say that they get bigger hard drives and they get faster processors and they get better software that's more efficient in producing those instructions. Now, there's a real difference between I need to show you this. Between Piaget's view of cognitive development and information processing views. On on the left side of the screen there, you see a tree that starts off as a small tree and it grows into a bigger tree. And there's sort of a growth curve under it where you can see this very quantitative, almost linear change. And that's how cognition is thought to change in an information processing perspective. We get faster at processing information. We can process bigger chunks of information, but it's this mostly linear sort of increase. On the right, you see a ladybug that starts out as an egg, and then there's sort of some kind of larva and I don't know what you call that, a poop, I don't know. Then it goes and changes into a ladybug. So you could also think of a butterfly that goes through a chrysalis and comes out a butterfly. There's this qualitative kind of change. They're not the same looking organism as they were before. It's not just that uh, a ladybug or a butterfly is a bigger larva or a bigger caterpillar. It's different now. And Piaget, with those stages of development, thought that our cognition changed in that more qualitative way. Today, we tend to think that what Piaget saw as being qualitative stages were actually reflections of more quantitative growth. What he thought were qualitative different aspects of cognition were more likely uh, reflections of this more quantitative kind of growth. So some of the different aspects of information processing, one is executive functioning. So this would be equivalent to maybe your operating system in your computer. This is the instructions for how the brain controls, how it directs its own information processing. How does the brain direct attention? How do we focus on the task to achieve the goals that we need to send information into the short term or long term memory? Executive functioning is essential for higher level thought and cognition. It's essential for self control. Any activity that requires complex thought, requires effortful, purposeful, intentional thinking. If information enters into our attention, then we can process it. But every bit of information we come into contact with in our environments, we ignore quite a bit. We just don't pay attention to it because if we did, we tried to pay attention to everything, we'd become overwhelmed. So we have to have some cognitive flexibility, the ability to focus on the aspects of a situation that we need in order to achieve our goals and sift through those things that we don't need to focus on. So shifting our attention, switching our views, focusing on those things that we need. And the word inhibitory control is there, and that's that aspect where we keep we let go of the information that's not relevant. We repress the responses and ignore that information or shut out that information that's going to distract us. This is called selective attention, being able to focus on specific stimuli, ignoring others. In general, two things. There are individual differences from child to child here. Part of it's probably temperamental. Uh, by that I mean biologically inborn based since they were born. Part of it is that individual differences because of their experiences in the environment. But across all children, we see a dramatic improvement in their ability to selectively focus, to not pay attention to things that are preventing them from focus on what they need to, and to selectively pay attention to those things they need to across the preschool years. If we do attend to something in the environment, we may move that into our memory system. And some things from the slide. One is most of us have really we don't remember very much in our first 3 years or so of life. First memories, occasionally we'll see someone with the first memory when they're 3, but most of us have memories that start after that time because when we're infants, we're using sort of a different memory system than we're using now. It doesn't mean that infants aren't remembering things, they are, uh, but we tend not to remember our own infancy and toddlerhood time. There's a distinction between implicit memories, which are those things we remember without intentionally trying. There's no conscious effort to recall them, and explicit memory, which are those things we intentionally, purposefully try to recall and to remember. There's also a difference in recognition and recall memory. This is kind of the difference between a fill in the blank test and a multiple choice test. Recognition memory means that you can identify something that you've seen before. Oh, there's that thing. Recall is the ability to reproduce that material from memory. So recognition memory is like a multiple choice test. Recall is like the fill in the blank test. In general, recognition memory is is a little easier for us than recall. It's usually more efficient because recognition, we have to encode the information and be able to retrieve it, but recall, we'll have to use strategies for retrieving it and being able to find our way back to that information, something that will connect us to it. One of the ways that that happens are what's called scripts, which are these general kinds of stories that we develop about things that happen in typical kinds of situations, what our expectations are. And those scripts can help us remember uh, what happens when we're in that kind of situation. So you have a script, for example, of what happens when you go to a fast food restaurant. You know what to expect will happen. And so if someone asks you what happened the last time you went to a fast food restaurant, you'll tap into that script and say, well, these are the kind of things that typically occur. So this is probably what happened, and it'll help you remember that. Because preschoolers may not have as well developed scripts and fewer life experience, sometimes they can add in some elements to their recall that didn't happen. So they may add some fictitious or fantasy elements into their accounts. Their memories are influenced by their culture and their experience, but young children can't have uh, very accurate memories. Memory is thought of as being two, well, really three. There's a sensory memory that we have to initially attend to something. From there, it can be moved into short-term memory, and from there into long-term memory. That short-term memory is sometimes called working memory. Just a few seconds that we can remember something without rehearsal, but if we keep repeating it to ourselves in our head, we can stretch that out for longer. Uh, that span, the number of digits we have there increases as we grow older. Uh, Children who are 2 or 3, toddlers, they have about 2 chunks worth of information that they can keep in their short-term memory. By age 7, it's about 5 chunks. Most adults have anywhere from 7 to 9 chunks, which makes it uh, kind of good for remembering phone numbers, right? We can keep that length of of numbers in our short-term memory. But we also learn some strategies to improve our short-term memory. So even though we are increasing in our number of slots, our number of digits that we can remember, um, we're also getting better able at making the most of those digits. So if somebody told you their phone number began with area code 423, you don't have to use 3 separate digits to remember 4 and 2 and 3. You can remember 423 as just one slot. So we chunk things and make the most of that number of slots. We also recognize that we can use strategies like rehearsal, repeating that number to ourselves, organization, thinking about uh, how these numbers, maybe so you've thought of a phone number as being, if the number was 4428, you might remember that it was 4 and then another 4 and then divided by 2 or times 2 equals 8. And so you remember how those numbers are organized. Elaboration can be visualizing what those numbers kind of expanding on what that number might be, relating it to somebody else's phone number or an important date, or having a mental picture about that thing. Um, those are strategies that our youngest children aren't using. For example, many preschoolers don't realize that if they don't rehearse that information, it'll be lost. These are strategies that can be taught and can be learned, and it's related to the development of what's called meta memory, which means thinking about or understanding about how our own memory works. coming to recognize the limitations of our memories, understanding strategies that we can use to support our memory. So this is just a graph that shows that kind of linear growth in the number of digits as children age from 2 up to adulthood. We see they go from about 3 digits up to between 7 and 8 digits. Um, that's a very linear looking kind of growth there. This is just a sort of a depiction that our storage becomes bigger and our processing becomes faster as we grow. So there's that quantitative kind of change there. If we rehearse something in short-term memory, we may move it into our long-term memory. And long-term memory is thought of as being as permanent. We may not always be able to retrieve that information out of there, uh, but it's there if we have some way to link back to it. You've probably had an experience after studying for a test that you read the question and you know that you studied that, you know that information is just almost there. You may be able to remember what page it was on the book or what the picture next to it looked like, and you're trying to just find your way back, find some breadcrumbs back to that memory. And that's how memory works. The more connections we have back to that, the more likely we are to be able to retrieve that. It's almost like this. If we wrote a note on a piece of paper and then put that paper into a file folder, into a drawer in a filing cabinet, in an office, on a floor of an office building, on a street in a city, we'd have to first find the right city and then find the right street and the right building and the right floor and the right office and the right filing cabinet and the file and finally the paper and where it's at on the paper. We have to make all the way back to that thing that we put in our memory. And the more, I don't think of a word besides breadcrumbs, the more clues we have to get back to that, the more threads, the more spider webs we have that will connect it to us, the better able we are to recall it. That's why those scripts and schemas can help us recall because they give us more connection, more guideposts back to where that memory is. I love this word fuzzy trace theory. It sounds so funny, but all it means is that one of the reasons our memories, our long-term memories get better as we transition across the preschool into the elementary school years is that we come to realize that we don't have to remember the verbatim detail of everything. So if someone told us a story, younger children would try to repeat back the story verbatim and they would fall down because they wouldn't be able to do that. Older children recognize that they just have to describe the gist of the memory. They get the main points of the story and not try to get every precise detail. We forget things that we once knew that were in our long-term memory because of decay. We sort of lose that track back to the memory because of retrieval failure. We're not able to remember that connection or interference. Other things come and kind of misdirect our route back to that filing cabinet into that folder. For young children, there's been quite a bit of study in their long-term memory, especially when you think of children as eyewitnesses in court testimony. And they can have very accurate memories, but they also are very susceptible to being led over time. If someone keeps making suggestions to them over a series of times, then that can start to enter into the child's memory.